University professor Dr. Dylan Reinhardt wrote the book on the psychology of murder. Now James Patterson has written the book on Dr. Reinhardt. The result is Killer Instinct, one of the most gripping murder thrillers to come along in years. When Reinhardt and his partner, Elizabeth Needham, hit the streets of New York City, the terror starts and it never stops. You will not be able to put down James Patterson's Killer Instinct.
True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Bill and Melanie McGuire were an attractive couple in their 30s. They had 2 young sons, 2 successful careers, and they had just closed on a $500,000 home when Bill disappeared. Melanie told their friends that they had fought on the night when they closed on their new home. Bill had physically attacked her and walked out, telling her he was done with her. Bill didn't seem like the type of guy who would hit his wife and leave his children behind. But Melanie insisted that he had hit her and walked out on his family. She even went to court and took out a restraining order against Bill. As the days passed and no one heard from Bill, Melanie appeared to be moving on with her life without him. But Bill's family and friends were worried. Bill had been a gambler. Maybe he had pissed off the wrong people. Then a bizarre news story got everyone's attention. First, a Kenneth Cole suitcase was found in Virginia Beach, and it contained a pair of bloodless male human legs that had been severed at the knees. 1 week later, Virginia Beach police recovered a second suitcase that was part of the same Kenneth Cole set. It held a 5-pound weight, black trash bags, and more human remains. This time it was a man's head and torso. But who this man was and when he had been killed were still unknown. Then the third and last suitcase was recovered within 2 weeks. It contained the man's hips and thighs. Virginia Beach police launched an extensive investigation to identify the victim and identified him as Bill McGuire. Join us at the Quiet End today for a very haunting case that became known as the Suitcase Murder. Well-respected fertility nurse Melanie McGuire was accused of her husband's murder and dismemberment, and she faced life in prison. Although her attorney would argue her innocence, a complex unraveling of the facts would reveal a twisted murder plot which grew from infidelity, greed, and hate.
New Jersey case means a New Jersey beer.
Yeah, I figured.
I'm assuming she killed him in New Jersey.
That's the belief, yes.
Because she didn't dump his body parts in New Jersey, I don't think.
No.
But the killing was done. So I picked a beer called Head High, which is brewed by Kane Brewing Company in Ocean, New Jersey. Far southern Jersey, this is the shore. Head High is an American IPA, and it's 6.6% alcohol by volume. Pretty nice beer. Hazy orange color, a white head, some pretty lace, aroma of citrus and pine. And we have a citrus taste up front, grapefruit and tangerine primarily, then some pine, overlying some caramel malt. Nicely hopped beer, good bitterness. A nice beer. More of a West Coast IPA. Try it.
That sounds delicious. I love that kind of beer.
This is your beer, Jill.
Yes. Okay, let's open that up right away. All right, lead the way.
Down to the quiet end.
And you can begin our story.
Okay, Bill McGuire was born in 1964 in River Edge, New Jersey. He had 2 older sisters. His father worked as a pressman for the New York Times, and his mother stayed home with the kids. Billy was the baby of the family, and he got a lot of attention. He was a cute but very rambunctious kid. Now, when he was 4 years old, his parents divorced. Bill's mother had to take a job to support the children, so she worked the night shift while Bill's oldest sister, Cindy, babysat her siblings. The mom worked 6 nights a week, so Cindy began to feel like she was a second mother to Bill.
Well, yeah, and I think Bill really looked at her that way, even as an adult.
Oh, yeah.
She had a very maternal influence on his life. And when Bill was 12, his sister Cindy moved out and married a guy named Bill McGuire. He was an older man who was a pharmacist. And then Bill's other sister Nancy moved out as well. Their parents had divorced and remarried a few times, so it was a very unstable environment.
So remarried each other?
Yes. Back and forth.
Wow.
And Nancy would later accuse their father of sexually abusing her, too. So there's a lot going on in the home.
Sounds like.
So Bill went to Catholic school, and he was a decent B student. He was quite outgoing and had a lot of friends. When he was just 15, he ran away from home and went to live with Cindy and her husband. And he did live with them for a while, but eventually left after not following all of her household rules, because Cindy was strict. Then after that, he went to his sister Nancy, but she didn't have room for him. So for a while, Bill lived with his high school coach, and then he lived with the family of one of his best friends. So this is kind of a hard scrabble life he had in his teens.
Boy, it sure is. And he's just kind of roaming around.
Yeah.
Doesn't have any stability, really.
Not much, no. And we're not really sure what was going on in the home that he felt like he had to run away. But it was probably tumultuous between the parents.
Well, I mean, just the fact that they were together, then not together, then together, then not together. I mean, that's unstable enough by itself.
Yes, absolutely. So Bill was living with his friend Lenny and his parents. And Lenny's 12-year-old sister Marcy got a really big crush on Bill. So after graduating in 1982, Bill joined the Navy, thought it would give him some direction in life. Leaving both his high school girlfriend behind and young Marcy, he broke 2 hearts when he left. Then in the Navy, Bill made friends with a guy named Joe Rice. He was another recruit who was 3 years older. At first, Joe thought that Bill was kind of obnoxious because he was always showing off and telling jokes, but then the 2 men eventually became close friends. And Bill was very well dressed and bought himself a Camaro, which he shouldn't have been able to afford. And he would admit to Joe that he was opening up checking accounts in fake names and writing bad checks in order to finance the lifestyle that he wanted to live.
Well, you know, I got certain needs in my life. I'm just going to write checks.
I think that's the way he looked at it. And remember, this is a guy who didn't have much guidance.
Right.
And he was really taken with having things that he hadn't had growing up. So, not to make excuses, because it really wasn't a good thing to do, of course.
Of course.
Yeah. But, you know, that's what he did.
So in 1985, I guess he's been in the service for about 3 years at this point. Bill's girlfriend from back home, Lisa, flew down to Norfolk to see him on a weekend leave. A few months later, Bill visited Lisa in Vernon, New Jersey, but their relationship came to an end. However, while he was in New Jersey, Bill saw Marcy, asked her out on a date, and then he and Marcy gradually became a couple, and they kept in touch with each other.
Yeah, so after Joe Rice married his girlfriend, he told Bill about how much more money he would be making with his naval marriage benefits. His income nearly doubled after he married his girlfriend. And then it wasn't too long after that when Bill decided to ask Marcy to marry him. So a lot of people thought Bill just did that to make more money.
Well, that's the impression.
Absolutely.
I mean, his buddy's telling him, wow, I almost doubled my income. So Bill's thinking, let's do it.
Right. Well, Marcy was younger, though. She just graduated from high school. But she was very, very taken with Bill, and she accepted his proposal, and she moved down to Virginia to live with Bill and to go to college. Marcy and Bill secretly married in a civil ceremony, and then they moved into a 1-bedroom apartment together.
In 1990, Bill left the Navy after earning his associate's degree from Tidewater Community College. Bill and Marcy moved to Edison, New Jersey, and he started attending Rutgers University, where he was going to study pharmacology. Bill and Marcy moved into an apartment. They both took jobs in local restaurants to pay the bills. But Bill was unhappy, and he wanted to split up. In 1992, he left Marcy. This surprised her, and I guess pretty much broke her heart, because the next 2 years she tried to win him back. But Bill never looked back at Marcy. He was dating new women again almost right away after the breakup.
Yeah, he had already really checked out of the marriage. And then in the summer of 1994, a friend of Bill's introduced him to Melanie Slate. The two were attracted to each other, and they seemed to have a lot in common. They seemed to really make a good match. So a little bit about Melanie. Melanie Lynn Slate was born in 1972 in Ridgewood, New Jersey. Her father left her mother when Melanie was still a baby, and then he died a few years later from cancer. Melanie's mother, Linda, moved back into her parents' home with her daughter, and Melanie's aunts and grandmother helped to raise her. Her mother, Linda, commuted to her secretarial job in Manhattan, and that's where she began having an affair with her boss, Michael Caparero, and that would last for years and years. Melanie grew up beside Michael Capanero's son, Michael Jr., and when Capanero finally left his wife, he and his son moved in with Linda and Melanie. But it certainly wasn't the ideal childhood.
It doesn't sound like it, does it?
No.
So the kids would go along with Linda and Michael when they went to Atlantic City. Michael Jr. and Melanie were usually left alone in hotel rooms for pretty lengthy times while the parents gambled. And Michael Sr. was such a high-stakes gambler that they were often given comped hotel suites and room service for the children.
So gambling really can be a serious addiction.
Well, of course.
I've never really known anyone that has it, but...
You say that with a sound of surprise.
Well, after I read about this, I looked into some other issues with that in children, and there is a problem in Atlantic City and in Las Vegas of people just kind of dumping their kids and running off to gamble for days at a time.
Well, I mean, you very often read stories about the type of thing where a parent has come to gamble and just dumped the kid somewhere. Gives them a few dollars, say, go wander around, have fun while I gamble.
Well, and I think they forget about their kids. They get so involved in it. Because there have been instances I was reading about where children have been molested or even kidnapped. You know, little girls using the restroom in a casino by themselves. Of course, that's not wise. So some horrible things have happened because of this. So the only thing I can think is it must be a very strong addiction like drugs for people to leave their kids like that.
Sure.
I mean, a lot of these people are normally good parents. But this is how Michael and Melanie grew up, with a lot of that. Now, even though their parents had some money and they were comped some nice suites, they were still abandoned.
Right. They were on their own.
So they became very self-sufficient, these kids. I guess that's the good part about it. Melanie was really an excellent student, and as she reached her teens, she was a beautiful girl. She had long, wavy brown hair and a petite figure. She became very self-confident and was very flirtatious with the boys at school. Some of the other girls disliked her, but Melanie had an outward kindness to her personality too, and she often took weaker girls under her wing and offered advice and support. Now, she is an attractive woman. You compared her to an actress. Who was that?
Melanie, I just mentioned that she looked like, what's her name, Mary Ellen Mastrantonio.
Is that her name?
Mary something Mastrantonio.
Okay.
Yeah.
So an actress from like the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so she's a good-looking woman. And she had a lot of freedom when she was a teenager, so that could be a bad combination, all this freedom with an attractive teenage girl. She lost her virginity on a trip to Mexico when she was just 13 years old because she and Michael Jr. were going out to nightclubs and bars. They were just on their own on these vacations. So she hooked up with older men, lost her virginity at a young age. And then Melanie also began to gamble, and she became promiscuous. She slept with older teens and young men who bought her gifts and took her out to fancy restaurants. She was almost like an escort in her teens with some of these older guys. And she was proud of it. She bragged about having affairs with two of her married high school teachers as well.
Yeah, that's something to brag about, isn't it?
Well, when you're a teenage girl, you don't know any better.
Yeah, that's right. Melanie often joked that she had such good grades because she was sleeping with her teachers.
That
But
might help.
in actuality, she worked hard. And she took difficult courses, all the time working part-time jobs after school. And she was involved in high school theater, was a member of the school choir, and she always made the honor roll. So she didn't need to sleep with guys to get grades. I mean, she was smart enough on her own.
I think it was more for attention. I think she really needed that attention.
Right. So, but Melanie was a top student. At the same time, she was able to be a party girl and had plenty of boyfriends. And she went through a rebellious period, and this would inevitably lead to conflicts with her stepfather, Michael Caporero. But by the time she graduated from high school, Melanie and her stepfather were good friends. She was in the top 5% of her class, and she went on to attend Rutgers with a double major in math and psychology. Wow.
I'm always impressed when someone majors in math. It's just because of my weakness in math, I guess. Now, she did have serious boyfriends in college, but her stepbrother Michael would say that she was really too selfish to ever be really in love with anyone. So that's a tough comment to make against your sister. In 1994, Melanie graduated from Rutgers with a baccalaureate degree in statistics and psychology. But then she decided she wanted to be a nurse, which seemed kind of out of the blue. She found a summer job as a waitress and moved back in with her mother and stepfather. And then she met Bill.
And they quickly fell in love. And they were both pretty sharp-witted, maybe a bit sarcastic, and it seemed like each had met their match. In 1995, Melanie enrolled in the Charles E. Gregory School of Nursing in Old Bridge, New Jersey, and began studying to become a registered nurse. Now, she still lived at home with her mother and stepfather. Although her relationship with Michael Caporero was good at that point, he didn't want her to move in with her boyfriend, Bill. Melanie spent many evenings at Bill's apartment, and she worked as a waitress part-time.
So by 1996, Bill and Melanie agreed that they would get married after they both graduated from college. They seemed to be deeply in love and devoted to one another, but they did fight fairly often, and their fights could be verbally abusive to one another. It went both ways. According to Melanie, when it was great, it was really great, but when it was bad, it was very bad. So this was one of those up and down type of relationships. There was a big blow-up between the two in March of 1996. Bill, who was known for having a terrible driving record, was driving with a suspended license when he was pulled over by police for speeding. He knew that he would get jail time, so he pressured Melanie to tell the police that she had been driving the car. He actually wanted her to go to court and lie about it for him. So according to court records, Bill got himself arrested then for fabricating false testimony for a motor vehicle stop and preparing false testimony with a witness. He spent a day in jail and was released on bail. But Melanie got into trouble for lying too, and she had to accept a plea agreement and 1 year's probation. And this left Melanie very angry. This was a wound that settled in deep, and it was one of these things like when they were arguing, she would always bring this up because she never forgave him for this. She was very resentful.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if she thought it might be kind of reasonable at the time to try to save him jail time, there's no good that's going to come out of that. You're going to be pissed off for years because you know deep down you shouldn't have done what you did.
Exactly. And the policeman had to know, even if they swapped seats after he pulled him over.
That wasn't going to work.
You could tell. And she was this tiny woman with long brown hair. Even from the back, you're going to be able to tell the difference.
I think so.
Yeah. But Bill dropped out of the pharmacology program and he began taking management courses. He wanted to be a businessman. Then Melanie graduated second in her class from nursing school. In her last year of classes, Melanie had become very interested in fertility as a specialty. As soon as she got her RN, she applied for a position in the infertility division of St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey, and she was hired. She worked in the egg donor division of infertility at first and traveled to infertility conferences. And right from the beginning, Melanie was known as an excellent nurse. She had a very easy bedside manner with clients and put them at ease with her sense of humor, which I guess could be a little colored.
Again, she could be sarcastic and kind of cutting with remarks, so yeah, it'd be a little tough to listen to her sometimes.
Yeah, because she could be a little cutting, but for the most part, the clients loved her. She was like a friend.
That they did. And her employers loved her.
Yeah.
So near the end of 1997, Bill proposed to Melanie. But Melanie's parents didn't approve of him. Michael Caporero in particular didn't think Bill was good enough for Melanie. But he worked hard, and eventually he did earn Michael's approval.
Well, one thing that Michael and Bill did have in common was that they both liked to gamble, and they often went to Atlantic City. So Michael started taking Bill with him to the casinos. He tried to teach Bill how to get the best comp packages from the casinos, and he had little tricks. Eventually, Michael Caporero accepted Bill as his son-in-law-to-be, and Melanie's family began including Bill in family dinners and get-togethers. Melanie was quite close with her family, and Bill was really attracted to that because he'd grown up in such an unstable family environment. He really liked the idea of having a close relationship with his future father-in-law, so he worked at getting his approval.
And then to please Melanie's family, Bill agreed to a Catholic wedding. As the wedding plans progressed, Melanie secretly went off birth control and tried to get pregnant. She even began taking fertility medication, even though there was no medical reason for her to believe that she needed it.
Yeah, when Bill found out about that, he really believed that her working around these women with infertility issues had made her worry about her own fertility, and she'd kind of become obsessed with it. And he didn't really want her to become pregnant so early on.
Yeah.
I mean, why couldn't she wait? She wasn't old.
Let's get married.
Right.
Start working on the marriage and then think about a family.
Yeah, well, she was putting the cart before the horse, as they say.
I think so. And the other thing, though, is, I mean, if she's a fertility nurse. She knows effects and side effects of some of these medications. Why is she taking them? Did she figure the possible good effects would outweigh any side effect?
I don't know. She seemed to think that they were harmless. I don't know a lot about that specialty, but she offered them to some of her friends, too, who were trying to have babies. She'd say, oh, I can give you some drugs from my office. So it's just kind of the way she operated, I guess.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
It's not wise. No, you shouldn't be self-medicating like that. But during her engagement and into her marriage, Melanie was having affairs, too, with the married obstetricians at St. Barnabas. The doctors and nurses worked closely together, and they traveled to conferences, so it was actually quite common among that group for affairs to happen. And of course, being as attractive and smart as she was, Melanie was quite popular with the doctors.
In February of 1999, Melanie told Bill she was pregnant. Now, this resulted in a big argument because Bill wanted her to wait until after their wedding. That was going to happen that spring. Anyway, she did miscarry that pregnancy, but soon after that, she announced she was pregnant again. This was in April of 99. So we're getting close to the wedding.
Right. So in May of 99, Melanie and Bill got their own apartment together. Melanie was making pretty decent money, and she enthusiastically started decorating the apartment with nice things. Bill was still in school and working as a waiter in an expensive restaurant, so he earned decent money. But there was still some tension between Bill and Melanie's stepfather. Even though Bill was in school and he was working, he was just a bit of a scammer. It's like he could never get out of that. It was just who he was. He was a gambler, and he talked all the time about opening his own restaurant or another business. And Melanie seemed like the more sensible one. And she was doing great at her job, very popular at her job.
And then just 3 days before their wedding in June, Bill filed for bankruptcy. I said he did this to take advantage of changes that were going to happen with bankruptcy laws. And he was looking to get a clean slate for lower interest rates in the near future. And then Melanie also declared bankruptcy a short time after their wedding.
So this was part of the scamming bill.
Yeah, so it would appear.
Yeah. And Melanie went along with that.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know.
So on the wedding day, Melanie's parents had a pre-wedding meal at their home. But things became really uncomfortable when Michael Caponero joked with Bill that he better take good care of his daughter or else. And Bill, who'd had a few too many drinks, I guess, made a remark about, well, where were you? when Melanie was in high school and having sex with her high school teacher. So even though they were trying to get along, Michael and Bill were far from being in harmony at the time of the wedding.
Fathers of the bride really hardly ever liked their son-in-laws, right?
I don't know. I think sometimes they do, but it's pretty common to make a joke like that or a comment like that. But Bill seemed to really take it to heart and got a little bit nasty.
Well, certainly the remark about, where were you when she was fucking her high school teacher?
Yeah.
No, that's kind of aggressive.
Yeah, especially at a pre-wedding dinner with all the family there.
Right.
Yeah, it was a bit of a blow-up. So, even though they were trying to be friends and they'd gone on some gambling trips together, there was some tension. I don't think that Michael ever totally approved of Bill.
Well, they just sound too opposite, Michael's more grounded and, a worker type of guy, and Bill's this dreamer, scammer, bullshitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Total opposites.
Yeah, kind of. So Melanie went to her office early on the morning of her wedding and took a sonogram picture of her fetus. Then she took the picture with her, and she was walking around showing it off at the reception. So some people thought that was kind of weird, especially since this was supposed to be like a traditional Catholic wedding. But Melanie really wanted to have a baby. She seemed unfazed by it and just really proud about it. She was only 9 weeks pregnant, and she was tiny, so you couldn't tell by looking at her. And she just looked great. She had this nice white dress, her fair skin, her dark hair. She looked kind of like Snow White.
Well, and then they had this elegant, expensive reception. It was an open bar, and there was striking views of the Hudson River and the Manhattan skyline. And the meal was steak and lobster. So they went all out. Melanie and Bill's first dance was to From This Moment On by Shania Twain, and Melanie danced with Michael Caparero to Daddy's Little Girl.
Now, I don't know if it's my age, I've just been around too long, but the Daddy's Little Girl dance kind of is a little much for me to stomach. Is that a terrible thing to say?
Well, this is, June of 99, so it's 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's true. But I think people still do it, and I don't want to insult anyone who has. It's just not my favorite thing.
Yeah, so don't do it anymore, people.
Yeah, really.
Jill says.
I say. So this reception lasted late into the night, and the couple was up at 6 a.m. to make their flight for their honeymoon in the Bahamas. And they took their friends Joe and Sue Rice along with them, or met them there anyway. And had a pretty good time, but they were kind of upset with Melanie for getting pregnant beforehand because they'd planned this big party trip. And of course she couldn't drink.
That's right. Can't party properly.
Exactly. So in February of 2000, Melanie gave birth to a son, and they named him Jack. Bill was thrilled to be a dad, and he called all of their family and friends to spread the news. Soon after Jack was born, Bill found them a 2-bedroom apartment to move into. Because remember, they were in a 1-bedroom. And then after her maternity leave, Melanie returned to her job as a fertility nurse.
Then that summer, Dr. Bradley Miller joined the fertility practice. He was put in charge of the new gestational carrier or surrogate program. So that's where a woman carries a fetus for someone unable to conceive or unable to carry a pregnancy. Dr. Richard Scott, one of the people working at the clinic, had known Dr. Miller since the 1980s, and he had highly recommended Miller for the position. So Miller went to medical school in Detroit and had served in the U.S. Navy. He had moved to the Bethesda Naval Hospital afterwards for his residency. When he was hired on to the fertility clinic, he was allowed to handpick his team, and he chose Melanie McGuire as his nurse. Now, surrogacy was by far the most expensive infertility treatment, and it was seen as a very important part of the practice. Well, sure, it's a cash cow.
Yes, yeah.
New Jersey was one of the few states to allow surrogacy at the time, so prospective parents had to have plenty of money to travel in for appointments and meetings.
Well, sure, they have to do that. They have to pay all the expenses of the mom who's going to carry the baby. There's just a lot involved. I mean, you can't be scrimping. You have to have some money put away to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it usually doesn't take the first time either. So super lucrative business, which made the physicians working with Melanie very wealthy. As millions of dollars came into the program, Dr. Miller was invited to be a full partner. Melanie had first met Dr. Bradley Miller in 1998 at a conference in California, and she'd made a good impression, let's just say. Not only was she attractive, but she was witty and personable, and they'd got along really well. Melanie's position was a critical part of the surrogate program's success, so he really relied on her as well. She was the primary contact for third-party egg donors, paid surrogates, and the infertile couples. So her position held a lot of responsibility, and she had to be super organized, which she was. She was good at that. The surrogate program really brought in a lot of wealthy clients from New York because the New York laws were less permissive. The patients had to be affluent in order to afford surrogacy. Many of the patients were older, and then they couldn't use their own eggs, so this increased the cost even more for them.
Certainly did.
This isn't something that insurance pays for. This is all cash.
So now that they had a child, Bill decided to quit his job as a waiter. In 2000, he finally did graduate with a bachelor's degree in management, and he took a good-paying job as a programmer analyst at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. So his job was to move around the different departments to do critical computer installations and troubleshoot any problems. He was given a phone and was expected to be available around the clock. Now, he seemed to be very knowledgeable, seemed to be very committed to his job. He was a friendly guy, and he seemed to be well-liked by his coworkers and peers.
Yeah, my impression is that he was one of these really outgoing people persons.
Yeah, like a salesman.
Like a salesman, yeah, totally. So Melanie became pregnant with their second child in 2001, and Bill wasn't really on board at first, but then he did grow to like the idea of having another child. He took a second job to make more money, but this meant that he and Melanie had very little time together. Their son Jack spent most of his time in childcare or staying with his grandparents. Melanie spent more time with Dr. Brad Miller than she did with her husband. She and Brad had always been flirtatious, but then their relationship began to reach a new level of intimacy. They talked about their marriages, they bought each other birthday gifts, they shared long lunches, and then when Melanie was about 38 weeks pregnant with her second child, the relationship became sexual. One day in Miller's office, he began to massage Melanie's shoulders, and they ended up having oral sex in the office.
So romantic.
Well, you never know.
That's true. So also at this time, Bill and Melanie were arguing a lot. There's a lot of stress in the marriage. One of the concerns was that their oldest son, Jack, was developmentally delayed. Bill blamed that delay on the fact that he thought he was spending too much time in daycare, not enough time at home with a parent.
And kind of blaming Melanie, it sounds like. Like she wasn't being an attentive enough mother.
Well, yeah, because he can fall back and say, look, I'm working 2 jobs.
Right.
Keep this household going.
Well, in her job, she did travel. She was very involved in her job, obviously. Plus, she was having that affair, which took a lot of time once that got going.
It certainly did.
So in 2001, the fertility practice opened their first satellite office in West Orange, and Dr. Brad Miller's surrogate program was really successful. So he had become a multimillionaire after he became partner. And Brad and his wife Charla bought a mansion in Bridgewater, New Jersey. In 2002, the Millers hosted an extravagant Super Bowl party, inviting all of the practice's employees along with their spouses, so of course that included Melanie and Bill. And Bill was so impressed with the Millers' house. He wanted to have a home of similar quality for his family. So Melanie was impressed too, but she told Bill, such a luxury is really out of our reach.
Yeah, we're never going to be able to do this, right?
Right, but they could still get a nice home.
Well, sure.
Then in 2002, Bill had his driver's license suspended in New Jersey for having numerous infractions. After surrendering his license to the state of New Jersey, he and Melanie drove to Pennsylvania. They used Melanie's Aunt Barbara's Pennsylvania address as proof of residence, and illegally obtained Pennsylvania driver's licenses and license plates for their cars. So Bill wasn't the only kind of scammer. Melanie was in on some of this.
Oh, she certainly was. Then that March in 2002, Melanie delivered another baby boy, and they named their second son Jason. Then soon after Jason's birth, the family moved into a large 3-story townhouse in Woodbridge. And when Melanie returned to work, she and Brad began a passionate affair. Well, began?
Well,
resumed.
Yeah, I suppose.
Oh,
I think it was just the one oral sex incident, and then she went out to have the baby, and then it became, a full affair after.
Okay, you're much kinder towards them than I would be.
Well, I don't know if it's a matter of kindness. It's just semantics. Either way, it doesn't matter. She was being unfaithful, obviously.
Yes, she was. Not only did they sneak off together at the office, but they went to hotels, and they had sex whenever they had meetings away from the office. Brad bought 2 cell phones with prepaid minutes on them so they could have their own private conversations without ever worrying about their spouses questioning the phone bills. And it got to a point where they were calling each other several times a day, spending hours on the phone. And over time, Melanie and Brad fell in love with each other, and they actually started talking about a life together.
Well, Bill was working so many hours between his 2 jobs and a new consult business he was working on that it was pretty easy for Melanie to carry on with her affair and not get found out. Brad Miller's wife Charla became pregnant with twin girls shortly after the affair began, but then there was a problem with one of the twins that they found on amniocentesis. One of the girls was born with Down syndrome. So, of course, this was difficult for Brad and his wife. And Melanie kind of stepped in, and she was always there to comfort Brad. Melanie and Brad were spending so much time together that the other staff were becoming suspicious. There were rumors about them having an affair, but Melanie never admitted it to her coworkers. Then after Jason was born, it became especially important to Bill to provide a nice house for his family. He's got 2 kids now. So he set himself a goal to secure a home within 18 months. He wanted to own a home before he turned 40. He also wanted to move the family to Virginia Beach. In Virginia Beach, property was much less expensive than in New Jersey, so he felt like he could get more home for his money.
So Bill started saving for a down payment, and his friend Joe Rice was sending him photos of houses on the market that met Bill's standards and were in his price range. When Bill and Melanie visited Joe and his wife Sue in Virginia Beach, Sue was excited to show Melanie home listings, but Melanie showed absolutely no interest. Bill tried to persuade her to move to Virginia, arguing that it would give them more time to spend as a family. But Melanie, at this point, she's just totally involved in her love affair with Brad, so there's no way she wants to leave New Jersey and be farther away from Brad. So Bill finally gave in, and he agreed to look for a house in good old New Jersey.
Well, Brad and Melanie agreed that they wanted to be together as a couple at this point. So Melanie said that she would divorce Bill, and then after a few months, Brad would divorce Charla. The 2 of them would then get married, buy a house, and have a child together. By this time, they were talking constantly. They were talking at least 20 times a day. One day, Dr. Scott called Dr. Miller into his office and confronted him about rumors that he and Melanie were having an affair. And Brad denied it, of course, claiming that he would never do something so unprofessional. But the rumors persisted. And this was serious. This was beyond trouble with the marriage. He could really get in trouble at work for doing this.
Well, yeah. And just the idea, you're having this affair, and you're positive you're discreet, and nobody's ever going to know that you're having it. And everybody knows.
Yeah, everybody knew.
There's no way you keep stuff like that a secret.
No, and they really didn't seem to be trying too hard to keep it a secret.
No, they thought they might be, but they weren't.
So Bill's out searching for the ideal home for his family, but Melanie, in her mind, is planning for a divorce. She told Brad Miller that she was going to move into an apartment with her sons, but then she told him she was afraid of Bill's reaction when she told him. He had told her if she ever got a divorce that he would take the boys and disappear. Bill had told her that if she ever got a divorce, he would take her boys and disappear so that she'd never see their children again. That's a pretty common threat.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's one of the things you threaten.
Yeah.
When things are going bad.
Sure, I think so.
So that November, Bill, Melanie, and Michael Caporero went to an open house for a $500,000 home. So Melanie and Caporero stayed downstairs, and the owner gave Bill a tour of the 4-bedroom house. The owner also noticed that it was Bill showing an interest in the house, and Melanie seemed to be very uninterested.
Melanie had really checked out of that marriage. When the contract with the realtor expired in January of 2004, the home's owner decided he would sell that house himself. So Bill came to the house just days later and left a $1,000 deposit. Then he went out shopping for mortgages, because he was going to be in mortgages up to his neck with this house.
I guess so, because they really can't afford a $500,000 home.
No.
So Melanie, meanwhile, was consulting a friend at work about divorce lawyers. So we look like we're going opposite directions right here, huh?
Yeah, but I don't think she'd really told Bill anything about it. So that's part of the problem.
She wasn't going to say anything to him until it was accomplished,
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it seems like it.
So Melanie seemed shocked at how much a divorce could cost her. So that's one problem. Then another problem is that Brad, the love of her life, began to balk at his own divorce. He said he wanted to wait for a year or so before leaving his wife.
That's a long time.
It is.
But remember, he has 2 young children, practically toddlers at this point, and one of them has Down syndrome, so there's a lot going on in that house, too.
Oh, you know that. I mean, just having a twin pregnancy is tough enough. There's got to be some other needs that you have to take care of the kid with Downs.
Well, yeah, and there's just a vast spectrum of how affected the child could be, right?
Right, developmentally.
So
even if it's a higher functioning Down syndrome, they still need extra services, and particularly in physical therapy, because they almost all have some muscle weakness.
Right. So Melanie, while Bill's out shopping for mortgages, was consulting about the divorce lawyers.
Yeah, and Bill is getting more and more excited for this house, and Melanie's feeling more and more trapped in this relationship.
Exactly.
Plus, she's also got some things going on with Brad.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, she's probably thinking, I'm never going to get out of this marriage. And my boyfriend that I want to leave the marriage for suddenly says he's not sure he wants to leave his wife.
Yeah.
Or at least not in as timely a fashion as they were going to.
Right.
So that's going to be tough.
So she's got some stress, and she also had access to Dr. Miller's prescription pads. Since part of her job was calling in medications to pharmacies for patients. With his permission, she'd copy his signature on prescriptions for drugs on a routine basis. But as her stress was rising, she began writing herself prescriptions for Xanax and other anti-anxiety medications.
I can't believe that he would allow her to forge his signature on prescriptions. I mean, you don't do that.
Right, but don't some doctors have stamps?
Well, they might have used to have stamps, but...
Well, now it's all electronic, but we're talking back in early 2000s.
Yeah, they might have had stamps, but that quickly became illegal.
Oh, it did, okay.
That you couldn't use a prescription with a stamped signature. You had to actually write a signature.
Especially because these were controlled substances. These weren't antibiotics. These were... Yeah.
So meanwhile, Bill had secured a first mortgage, and he was hard at work getting a second mortgage so he could complete the purchase of the house.
So that's pretty crazy to me. I'm naive. I didn't know people could get 2 mortgages when they buy a house. I thought a second mortgage was something you got later on when you had some equity, if you needed it to, do things to your house or pay off some bills.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could get 2 mortgages before you even have the house.
Well, that's a new one on me, too.
Seems like financially risky.
It does. I can't believe the banks would do that.
Yeah, well, wasn't this in the time when the housing crisis was booming and it hadn't crashed yet?
Possibly.
I think it crashed in 2006, 2008, somewhere around there. So they were giving out crazy mortgages at that time. But it just seems like this would be really stretching them financially more than they should, putting them in a dangerous position financially.
Yeah. Now, Bill also had estimates from a moving company, and he had also taken 2 weeks off from work in preparation for the move. So, and this was his dream, his dream house. And he talked about the house to anyone who he could get to listen to him.
Yeah, so it's really sad for him that his wife wasn't as excited, to say the least.
Yeah, and he must have noticed that. I mean,
probably, yeah. But maybe he thought she would, once they got the house, things would get better. There's a lot of things you say to yourself to try and get through hard times like that. But Melanie was really busy planning her exit strategy from her marriage. In February of 2004, she'd gotten back in touch with an old friend from nursing school, a guy who had been in love with her, and his name was James Finn. She told Finn that her marriage was in trouble and that she was under a lot of stress. She also told him that Bill was a big gun enthusiast and that he was a heavy drinker who often hallucinated.
On April 8th, 2004, Melanie did an internet search on her home computer for the tranquilizer Dalmane. She filled out a prescription for the drug in her late mother-in-law's name, giving her old address, and then she forged Brad Miller's name on it, dropped it off at a Walgreens. Less than half an hour later, she picked up the prescription.
So now her plan is in action.
She's moving ahead.
On April 11th, which was Easter Sunday, Bill and Melanie went to a barbecue at another couple's home in Brooklyn. And this couple would say later that Melanie and Bill seemed fine, and Bill was super excited about their new house. But back in their townhouse that evening, Melanie went on the home computer again and searched for undetectable poisons and Tomax/suicide. The following week, Melanie contacted James Finn again and asked him about purchasing a gun. Finn gave her information on how to get a gun permit in New Jersey, but he added that it was easier to get a permit in Pennsylvania because all they required was proof of residence. Now remember, Melanie had a Pennsylvania driver's license with her aunt's address on it. So that Friday, April 16th, she went on her computer and did a search on where to purchase guns without a permit. Then she looked at some NRA websites and searched for instant poisons. So she's busy on that computer.
I guess.
Then on Monday, April 26th, 2 days before the scheduled closing on the house, Melanie called a place called John's Gun and Tackle Room in Easton, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so that afternoon around 1:30 p.m., after she'd picked up a new prescription for Xanax, she drove to John's store, John's Gun and Tackle Room, and she was waited on by the owner, John Kosha. And he would remember her. She was the first registered nurse to buy a handgun from him. And taking Jim Finn's advice, she bought a .38 special for $270. She also bought a box of Ultramax wad cutter bullets, which are mainly used for target shooting. So she filled out the federal and state permit forms using her Pennsylvania driver's license. Kasha ran a check to the state police computer and Melanie's driver's license number. So she was immediately approved, and she paid everything in cash.
Then at 8:30 that evening, Melanie searched the hypnotic sedative Coral Hydrate on her home computer. So Coral Hydrate is easily soluble in alcohol, and it's a controlled substance that requires a prescription, of course. And its properties and effects have sometimes led to it being used as a date rape drug. And you looked it up. You said it's not even legal in the U.S. anymore.
Well, it's been taken off the market because of the side effects. It is too often a very narrow therapeutic index, and it's easy to overdose. And by overdosing, you could unfortunately die.
Sure.
So it's not on the market anymore. Besides that, it wasn't that good a drug. Its effects were variable. When it worked great. But sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes it had a prolonged effect so that somebody would stay sedated for a lengthy time. It's just not a good drug.
Okay, so after she looked that up, she searched for the effects that it had. Then she visited the Walgreens website and searched the store locator to look up the hours. Then investigators believe that Melanie forged a prescription for 500 milligrams in 5 mLs of coral hydrate syrup. And that would be in a 60 ml bottle. So that's like 2 ounces, right?
2 ounces in the bottle. 500 milligrams per 5 mLs means that she had in the whole bottle 6 grams of chloral hydrate.
Well, as we like to say, that's a shit ton.
That's a big dose.
Yeah.
He would need, if she was looking for some sedation, a typical adult dose would be 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams. And she had 6 times that amount.
Right. So that could sedate him for quite a while.
Yep.
So she made out the prescription to a one-time patient of Dr. Miller, whose information was available to her through patient records. And then, of course, she forged Dr. Miller's name on it. So this was super reckless to do this. How could she think she was going to get away with this? I don't know, because this is not a drug that he would normally prescribe to anyone.
No.
This is a weird drug, really.
And it's going to be, there's too many ways for things to go wrong.
Yes.
If Bill's death was investigated, which it turned out to be, obviously, that would be something they'd find out.
Easily.
Brad Miller finds out. He knows that he didn't write it. Who did write it? So
they're going to turn to her pretty quickly.
There goes that relationship.
Yeah.
I guess you don't love me as much as you said you did.
Well, that's really the least of her worries. So on the morning of the closing of the house, Melanie drove to Walgreens and she dropped off that coral hydrate prescription. She picked up the drug several minutes later. And then at 2 p.m., Bill and Melanie drove to an attorney's office in Princeton, New Jersey for the closing. Before 3 p.m., they were the owners of Bill's dream home. The attorney would later describe them as a very upbeat couple. But Melanie called Brad Miller in a panic soon after the closing. She was surprised and upset that the closing had gone through, she said. She thought they were just going to go talk to the attorney. At least that was her story. And Brad Miller was really angry and told her, go back there and rip up the papers. Why the hell are you buying a house with him if you're going to divorce him?
Yeah, but, he's the one who's dragging his heels on this.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what was up with that. He wanted her to get the divorce first, and then he was going to wait a while.
Yeah.
So I don't know about that.
But within minutes after crying to Brad, Melanie called her sister-in-law, Cindy Ligosh, and seemed to be in a happy mood. She told Cindy they had closed on the new house and everything was great. And then later that evening, she called Brad back and told him not to worry, everything would be fine. So do you think this is when she finally got to the decision point?
Yeah, that evening is when things really started moving in that plan.
Everything's going to be fine. I got it figured out.
Which is craziness, really. So just before 6 p.m., Bill called his friend Joe Rice with the good news about his closing. And according to Joe, Bill was really excited and happy. And John congratulated him on his accomplishment. He'd gotten a house before he was 40. Way to go. And then he expected to talk to Bill again later in the week. But Joe, nor anyone else besides his killer's killer, would ever talk to Bill McGuire again.
Final conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get into the details of what happened to Bill and who bore responsibility, let's take a short break for our sponsors.
Well, let me tell you about Native. Native creates safe, simple, and effective products that you can use daily. Their products are filled with ingredients found in nature, like coconut oil, shea butter, and tapioca starch. As a cancer survivor, I've chosen to avoid all products containing aluminum, parabens, and talc. I like the natural scents, especially coconut and vanilla, and the ease of use. It's just a solid stick that dries quickly. But the best thing about Native is that it really does work. It'll get you through your workouts, your long work days, and even the rigors of motherhood. Native comes in a wide variety of yummy scents for men and women, like coconut and vanilla, lavender and rose, cucumber and mint, and eucalyptus and mint. There's even an unscented formula and a baking soda-free formula. There's no risk to try Native because they offer free returns and exchanges in the U.S. If you choose to subscribe, you can save $2 per stick and have your favorite scent delivered on your schedule. For 20% off your first purchase, visit nativedeodorant.com and use promo code BREWERY during checkout. That's nativedeodorant.com with promo code BREWERY to get 20% off your first purchase.
And you have one more, I believe, from your old fave.
Yeah, Madison Reed.
Yeah, I thought she was lurking.
You can take coloring your hair at home to the next level with Madison Reed, because Madison Reed gives you gorgeous, professional hair color delivered to your door for less than $25. Madison Reed hair color is one of a kind because it's multidimensional, giving you your choice of over 45 multitonal shades that have been developed by master colorists who really know how to blend the nuances of cool, warm, light, and dark. Many of our listeners have written to tell me how Madison Reed hair color has improved their lives, and I totally get it. Madison Reed delivers gray covering, natural looking hair color to my door when I want it. So now I'm free from long, pesky salon visits, and I'm saving money while my hair looks and feels better than ever. It's soft, strong, and natural looking, and I have one less thing to worry about. So I'm always happy to recommend Madison Reed to our listeners. It's affordable, it's convenient, and very high quality. We're busy women, so don't we deserve gorgeous professional hair color delivered to our doors on our schedule for less than $25? Of course we do. Find your perfect shade at madison-reed.com. True Crime Brewery listeners get 10% off plus free shipping on their first color kit using code BREWERY. That's code BREWERY at madison-reed.com.
So let me go over the scenario that police and prosecutors believe happened in the murder of Bill McGuire. At least I'll get us started on the theory. After Bill called his friend Joe Rice and excitedly told him about closing on his dream house, prosecutors believe that Melanie had set her plan in motion to kill Bill. So after 6 o'clock, Melanie sent the children upstairs to play, and Bill opened a bottle of wine for them to celebrate the closing. So when Bill wasn't looking, Melanie added enough liquid chloral hydrate into Bill's wine to make him fall asleep. So this is even more sad when you think that this was one of the happiest days of Bill's life. He had met his goal of buying a home for his family before he turned 40.
Right, and he'd never get to enjoy it. That was taken from him.
That was. So a little after 7 p.m., Bill was already zonked out when the man who sold him the house called Bill's cell to congratulate him on the purchase. No one answered. He called back a minute or two later, and Melanie answered the phone this time. And he told Melanie that he would be moved out by the weekend and he would call Bill the next day. Melanie called Brad Miller a little after 8 o'clock from her private cell phone, and they spoke for about 15 minutes. She told Brad that Bill was napping, and she would talk to him about a divorce and what to do about the house when he woke up. And she promised to update Brad the following morning.
So at 5 a.m. the next morning, Brad called Melanie's cell, but she didn't answer. Over the next couple of hours, Brad called her and left 2 more messages. He really wanted to know what was going on and what had happened with her discussion with Bill. But I think Melanie was busy creating her alibi, because it's believed that Bill was still alive but unconscious when Melanie sent an email to Bill's boss from Bill's email address that morning, telling him that Bill would be out sick.
Bill was likely still unconscious on the sofa when Melanie got the young boys ready for preschool. She drove Jack and Jason to the Kindercastle in Metuchen and dropped them off at 8:30 in the morning. Then she told the daycare director that she was filing for a restraining order against Bill because he had hit her the night before.
So Melanie called the fertility practice at 9 a.m. to say that she would be out sick for the day. Then she called Brad Miller and told him that she and Bill had fought and Bill had walked out. She explained to Brad that Bill had woken up about 4 a.m. that morning and they'd gotten into an argument over the house situation. Bill had said that if she wasn't happy with him or about buying the new house, he was leaving. She could have the house for all he cared. According to Melanie, the argument turned into a physical altercation after that, and Bill pushed her up against a wall, put a dryer sheet in her mouth, and choked her. And the dryer sheet is just a weird thing that She said he had a problem with dryer sheets, and if there was a dryer sheet in the kid's clothing, he would call her a terrible mother. And he said she was too lazy to use the liquid softener that you had to put in after a certain cycle. So I guess that was a thing.
I guess so. It's a weird thing, but it's
a weird thing. Yep.
Melanie told Brad that her younger son, Jason, had woken up while they were arguing, so she scooped him up and took him into the bathroom and locked the door. And she stayed huddled with Jason in the bathroom while she heard Bill preparing to leave. And after she heard the front door slam, she came out of the bathroom, and Bill was gone. Last time she'd seen him.
Yeah, Melanie asked Brad Miller to call in a Xanax prescription to the pharmacy for her, and he did, prescribing 0.25 milligrams for situational anxiety related to domestic violence. Now, she was already calling in the 0.5 milligrams for herself, or forging it. So I think she was getting a little bit of a Xanax dependence.
Oh, probably.
Yeah. So Melanie then called Jack's speech therapist and canceled the child's afternoon appointment. And after that, she called a friend and told her she was getting a restraining order and a divorce lawyer. When Melanie was alone in her townhouse, prosecutors believed that she had an accomplice who helped her kill and dismember her husband. So Bill would have remained unconscious on the living room sofa as Melanie shot him in the forehead with her new gun. She probably used a pillow or blankets to muffle that noise. The bullet entered Bill's frontal bone and moved through his brain, exiting the back of his skull. Then she shot him in his lower chest into his abdomen, then twice more into his chest.
Just making sure.
Right. She was sure he was dead at this point, and she would have begun dismembering him.
So the kids were in daycare till around 5 o'clock. So Melanie had several hours to dismember Bill's body and clean up thoroughly. It's likely that she used the shower on the second floor. This shower had an enclosed stall that would have been the best place to contain Bill's blood and body tissues.
So this is horrific, huh?
Isn't it?
It's just really hard for me to believe anyone could do that, although I know someone had to. And there's a lot of evidence that it was her.
So Melanie, and if she had an accomplice, this was the time when they would undress Bill, leaving his underwear on. They used a reciprocating power saw with a hospital blanket placed over it to muffle the sound. Bill's severed legs were drained of blood before they sawed through his backbone and internal organs. After his body bled out in the shower, they put Bill's dismembered remains into black plastic trash bags. They wrapped Bill's head and upper torso into industrial-sized, heavy-duty trash bags and taped them shut with painter's tape. Once his body was cut up and bled out and packaged, Melanie cleaned the bathroom until there was no evidence of blood or body parts or body tissue.
Yeah, I guess the one thing she did overlook, they believe, was the bottom of her shoes, because she would end up leaving traces of blood and flesh onto the carpet of Bill's car. These tiny traces have been called human sawdust to some forensics investigators, but there are different opinions on whether this is actual true evidence or not, but we'll get into that. So that day, Melanie drove to the courthouse in the afternoon for a temporary restraining order against Bill. Then she called around looking for a divorce attorney. She called Brad Miller many times that day, and she told him that she wanted to look for an apartment for her and her sons, and she planned to get to daycare early to make sure that Bill didn't pick up the kids before she did. So she picked up Jason and Jack at 5:30, and she took them right over to her parents' house, where they would stay for the next several days.
Now, Melanie spent that Thursday night at a hotel, and at about 11 o'clock that night, she and her alleged accomplice drove Bill's car and her SUV 105 miles south to Atlantic City. The plan was to abandon Bill's car in the Flamingo Motel parking lot so it would look like he had gone gambling before he disappeared.
Yeah, but at 12:41 a.m., a surveillance camera at the parking lot had caught Bill's car. So Melanie's SUV was also filmed pulling up alongside his car, and it stopped just long enough for her to get into her car from Bill's before leaving again and driving back north. His sister, Cindy Lagash, was getting really worried about Bill by that Saturday, and late that night, Melanie and her stepfather, Michael Caparero, drove to Atlantic City in Melanie's SUV. At 12:54 a.m. Sunday morning, Melanie's Easy Pass registered at a toll booth on the Atlantic City Expressway. And several minutes later, Melanie's home phone received an unanswered call from Bill's cell phone. So that all seemed like a setup.
Yeah, there's no real explanation for what they did, right?
Not that would make them innocent, no.
Right. So no one knows what Melanie and Michael Caporero were doing in Atlantic City. Prosecutors believe they drove to Bill McGuire's car, where Melanie left travel ads for Virginia Beach and Atlantic City on his front seat. They believe this was an attempt to make it look like Bill was planning to stay away from home. Someone also left the bottle of chloral hydrate in the glove compartment. Maybe he was trying to make Bill look like an addict. Bill's cell phone and work computer were left in his trunk too. Later on that Sunday morning, Melanie picked up her Xanax prescription, and the police believe that she then returned to her townhouse and picked up Bill's body. For the next 7.5 hours, her location is unknown. It's believed that she drove over 300 miles and dumped Bill's remains in 3 Kenneth Cole suitcases into the Chesapeake Bay.
So unfortunately, it was a 12-year-old boy who found the first suitcase and saw the 2 severed human legs in black plastic bags.
That'll give you some nightmares when you're 12, right?
Awful. Well, he was with other people, and he thought it was some kind of like treasure. He was excited about it and opened it up, and holy shit.
Yeah.
So he was traumatized, I'm sure. A week later, police were called and recovered the second suitcase. And this one had a 5-pound weight, the same kind of trash bags, and more human remains. This was a man's head and upper torso. And there were gunshot wounds in the head and the chest. The third and final suitcase was found on May 16th. It contained Bill's hips and thighs. Virginia Beach police were trying desperately to identify the victim then. Just horrific. And when nothing was heard from Bill, Joe Rice and his wife Sue thought about these awful news stories about a man's dismembered corpse being found in 3 separate matching suitcases. So they're thinking about Bill, then they're thinking about this story, they're starting to put it together.
They are. Now the police released a sketch. Sue and Joe compared it to a picture of Bill McGuire. And then Joe called the police and gave them Bill's name, because they were fairly convinced that that picture was their friend Bill.
Yeah, I mean, it was the picture, of course, it was all bloated and disfigured, but you did see some similarity in the eyes and nose. Plus, he's missing.
Right. I think if you add those two together, because I would be hard-pressed looking at that picture that was drawn and then seeing a picture of Bill. There's maybe a faint resemblance, but it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I think you had a tougher time with it than I did. I kind of saw the resemblance there. But I would think maybe if you knew him personally,
yeah,
it would
which they did.
Yeah.
And then if you add in the fact that he'd been missing for a couple of weeks, that's jackpot.
Right, and then police did show them an actual photo of the face, which must have been horrific.
I think. They did fairly quickly find out that it was Bill who was in the suitcases.
Yeah. So, of course, police wanted to talk to Melanie McGuire about her husband's disappearance. Melanie and Michael Caporero implied that Bill had a gambling problem and his death was possibly a mafia hit. But the police didn't believe that that was the case. That seemed pretty far-fetched. And they considered the surgeon-like cuts done to Bill's body and thought that he was probably killed by somebody with some medical training. Melanie was a registered nurse. Another thing, a hospital blanket like the ones used at Melanie's fertility practice had been found inside one of the suitcases.
Yeah, now the fact that she's an RN, I mean, I don't think that means that much in terms of having knowledge to dismember a body. You don't do gross anatomy classes in nursing school, do you?
Well, no. I mean, you don't actually work on a human body, no.
Yeah.
And I don't know why you'd have to have any medical knowledge to cut a body up like that.
My point.
It's awful, yeah.
Is that, yeah, you don't have to.
No, you don't. But maybe it would mean that you'd have more of a stomach for it if you were a nurse.
Sure.
You'd probably have more of a stomach for blood and things like that. Maybe she was in on some surgeries, so maybe it wouldn't be as shocking to someone like that. That's all I can think.
Yeah, I think I'd go with that.
Yeah.
So Melanie was questioned, and of course she denied owning a matching luggage set, like the one Bill's body had been found in. But she did suggest to detectives that Bill may have gone to Atlantic City, and of course that's where his car was found.
Yeah, now the McGuire's townhouse was searched, and it was super clean, like too clean. There were no signs of a struggle, and it had been pretty much emptied out by then. Melanie had already moved out by this time, and she said that she had given all of Bill's clothing away. The police did find some black plastic trash bags, just like those that had been found with Bill McGuire's remains. And a day after Melanie's interview, she told one detective that, "Oh yeah, I remember that I did own a set of matching Kenneth Cole reaction luggage." And she was shown a picture of one of the cases and did identify it as hers.
Now, I wonder why she changed the story. That's never good.
It's never a good idea, I know. But maybe because she just thought that other people would recognize it.
Yeah, but she should have... Oh, never mind.
Doesn't matter.
No.
So detectives believed that Bill had been killed in New Jersey and transported to Virginia. But of course they really didn't have any evidence, but they had pretty good circumstantial evidence after they searched the gun registries. They learned that back on April 26th of 2004, Melanie had purchased a .38 special handgun at the small gun shop in Easton, Pennsylvania, and that was just 2 days before Bill disappeared. Through her phone records, detectives found her old friend James Finn, and Finn was a gun collector. After speaking with him, they learned that in the weeks leading up to Bill's death, Melanie had emailed him and told him that she was worried about Bill becoming unstable and paranoid due to his excessive drinking, and she told him she wanted to buy a gun for her own protection. And Finn had told her that she could buy a gun more easily in Pennsylvania.
Now, so detectives wanted to find this gun. Finn was beginning to doubt Melanie, so he agreed to call her and be recorded. He ended up calling Melanie more than once. Now, the police would feed him questions to ask her, and finally she told Finn that she had bought a gun and put it in a storage unit. But, she said when she returned to the unit, the gun was gone. Missing gun story.
For someone who's supposed to be smart, this is so stupid.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's really bad. So the gun couldn't be found to be tested to see if it was the murder weapon, so that was a big disappointment for police. Detectives turned to the question of motive, and they discovered that Melanie was in this long-term affair with Dr. Bradley Miller. In interviews with Brad Miller, detectives learned quite a bit, and Brad began to doubt what Melanie had been telling him about Bill's disappearance. Brad told the police that Melanie had admitted something to him that was strange, that after her argument with Bill on the night of the house closing, she had driven out to Atlantic City. Once there, she said, she had somehow found Bill's car and moved it to the Flamingo Hotel, and she claimed to have done this out of anger so he wouldn't be able to find it. She told Brad that a security camera might have filmed her moving his car. But she was tired that night, so she took a cab home, spending $200 on that ride. She left her car in Atlantic City overnight and took the cab home, and then the next day she took a cab all the way back to Atlantic City to get her car. So this is a tough story to believe for many reasons.
Yes.
First of all, it couldn't be that easy to go into Atlantic City and just randomly find a car. There are so many places it could have been.
You're right.
And to go through all that just to move it because she was angry?
Yeah, I'm going to move it and play mind games with him.
Yeah. And I guess someone in her defense had said that he had done that to her before. But still. And then you're going to leave your car and take this long, expensive cab ride home, knowing you're going to have to take another cab back the next day?
Right. Both ways. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just paying for the one-way ride.
No.
Got to get back there.
Right, and why waste all that time? Why not just, drive home? So anyway, it's just
Why,
not
indeed.
believable. It's not believable at all.
No, it's not.
No, fuck that story. So no cab companies had a record of being hired for this trip, and Brad Miller also told detectives that Melanie had told him that she'd been shopping for furniture in Delaware, not far from Chesapeake Bay, just one day before the first suitcase was found. So that puts her in another suspicious area. There's no evidence that she bought furniture or anything.
No, I mean, there's just too much contradictory or too many things that don't add up here.
Right. And the only reason she admitted to these things is because she was afraid she was caught on tape.
Right. So detectives asked Brad to confront Melanie while they recorded the call, and he agreed. So he called Melanie and told her he was worried that the police suspected him or her stepfather as accomplices to her murdering Bill. This didn't shake her. She stood firm with her story. Now, the evidence might have been circumstantial, but it was piling up against Melanie. There was the missing gun that she had purchased in Pennsylvania, the black trash bags, her unexplained trips, the hospital blanket, and the suitcase set.
So yeah, it's circumstantial, but it's pretty damn strong, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
There's a lot against her here. So June 2nd, 2005. It's over a year after Bill's murder, and Melanie was finally arrested. A detective followed her in an unmarked cruiser and waited as she left her home to take her sons to daycare. When Melanie parked outside of a coffee shop and went in, she left the boys in the back seat of her car. Then after buying coffee, she got back into her SUV and drove north on the Garden State Parkway.
When she got off at the Matukin exit, it was around 9 o'clock. She dropped off 5-year-old Jack at his school and then drove 3 more blocks to Kindercastle to drop off Jason. Then at 9:30, she was arrested outside of Kindercastle.
Yeah, they waited for her to drive a little bit away, I think, just not to cause an uproar at the school.
Right.
But this was well planned out. And that afternoon, Melanie pleaded not guilty to the murder of Bill McGuire. Michael Caporero picked up the boys that afternoon and arranged to pay the $75,000 needed to get Melanie out on her $750,000 bail. So, as we're thinking about accomplices, I keep thinking of Michael Caporero, because he seems to be very helpful to Melanie in all of these things, and a little too involved. Now, of course, they first considered Bradley Miller.
Well, sure.
Right. So Melanie finally went to trial nearly 2 years after her arrest. And being a privileged person, she got to stay out of jail all that time. Just make a note of that.
Well, she made bail.
Right. But if you're a poor person, you'd be sitting in jail for 2 years waiting for your trial.
You would be.
We need to change how that works. But I digress. So the prosecution began their case with Melanie's purchase of the .38 caliber gun just days before Bill's death. Melanie had not told anyone about her gun purchase until after Bill was dead. Plus, she changed her stories. She told some friends that Bill wanted the gun, and she told others that she had bought it for protection against Bill, who had become abusive. So I guess the story about buying it for Bill was because Bill had a felony history for his check writing scams, so she bought the gun for him, which we know is illegal, but she'd probably rather get in trouble for that than for the murder.
Oh, absolutely.
You think, yeah.
That's a no-brainer.
Right. A forensics expert testified for the prosecution and showed the jury the significant similarities between the trash bags that had been found with Bill's body parts and the trash bags that Melanie had used to give away Bill's clothes. So he concluded that the bags had been manufactured by the same company in the same location. And that just sounds like something you'd see on forensic files.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I was also suspicious that the CSI team thoroughly searched the McGuire's townhouse, but they hadn't found any blood or DNA material. The home had been so meticulously cleaned, there was no trace evidence that anyone in the McGuire family had lived there.
So that's odd. I mean, some people are super clean, and that might explain it, but it's also a bit of a red flag to me.
This goes beyond being super clean.
Yeah.
And perhaps more damning was that the CSI team had found traces of Bill's body in vacuum particles taken from his car. And the jury was reminded that Melanie had admitted to going to Bill's car in Atlantic City. The theory was that she had Bill's body tissue particles on the bottom of her shoes, and she had transferred them into the carpet of his car. That's very good forensics research, don't you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it's 100% legitimate, but yes.
Well, if there's a sufficient amount to get DNA from, yeah, it's legit.
Yeah, but there were other arguments from the other side that, of course, it's his car, he's going to shed skin cells.
Sure.
But then there was the chloral hydrate prescription. Dr. Brad Miller's signature on the prescription had been forged, and the medication had been picked up at a Walgreens just 1 mile from Melanie's children's daycare center. So Brad ended up being an important witness for the prosecution. And of course he testified that he hadn't written that prescription, and that chloral hydrate was not a drug he had ever prescribed for his patients.
Yeah, besides that, the chloral hydrate bottle had been recovered from Bill's car in the Atlantic City parking lot.
Right. One other very important source of circumstantial evidence was found on Melanie's home computer. There were the searches for poison, chloral hydrate, the location of the Walgreens where the chloral hydrate was picked up, and how to commit murder. Then there were multiple searches on guns and gun laws. Melanie had also contacted the Turnpike Authority to try and get a charge removed for a toll booth between Atlantic City and her home on the day Bill disappeared. Once the toll booth hit was exposed to the investigators, Melanie changed her story about driving out to Bill's car in order to have a reason for that.
She had to change it.
And they believed that she'd probably put the transponder under a seat or something, thinking it wouldn't pick up. But it did.
It will. Melanie's defense attorney, a guy named Joe Tacopina, claimed that investigators had set their sights on Melanie from the start. They focused on evidence that incriminated her and ignored evidence that did not. So the prosecution's case was circumstantial, and there seemed to be plenty of reasonable doubt. So Tacopina claimed that it was impossible for Melanie to have killed and dismembered Bill without leaving behind any evidence in their home.
Well, I think it would be tough to dismember someone and not leave one drop of evidence. There had to be some very thorough cleaning going on.
Well, if you do it in a shower,
yeah,
and it's a stall shower.
Right, it was.
So I think you could get that clean.
I guess, but what's a reciprocating saw anyway? That's electric. Or gas, it's powered. It's not just a handsaw.
Right.
So it would have to be pretty messy.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible to clean it up. I'm just saying that would be quite a cleaning job you'd have to do. So as for the body tissue found in Bill's car, there really was no way to be certain that the tissue was from a dead body. So Bill's tissue could have just been normal shedding of his skin, and you really can't say that that means he was killed. So,
well, sure. It's his car.
Yeah, so the defense kind of dismissed that. Although it's already out there, the jury's heard it.
Then on cross-examination of Dr. Miller, Tacopina revealed that Brad and Melanie were still sexually involved when his calls to her were being recorded. More importantly, perhaps, Melanie didn't implicate herself in any of these calls.
Right, so what's the significance of him still having sex with her, other than saying he's kind of a backstabber?
Yeah, well, I guess they point that out just to show that maybe he didn't question her the way they wanted him to, or...
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I mean, this is the defense saying that, though. Why would they care about that? I thought that maybe he was trying to say that Brad didn't really think Melanie was guilty, or he wouldn't have kept having sex with her.
Well, that's possible. The defense is doing things to try to show that she couldn't have possibly killed her husband.
Well, sure. But I think it would help them to kind of give the jury the impression that Brad didn't think she did it either. Because they can't just ask him his opinion on that.
No, they can't.
No.
So if they're still sexually involved and she doesn't implicate herself, that's as good as saying, I didn't do it.
Right, it kind of helps.
Then according to Tacopina, Melanie had not told friends a consistent story about why she'd purchased the gun, because Bill had asked her to buy the gun for him. Bill had a felony record for check fraud, so he was not allowed to purchase a gun.
Right, but she hadn't told that story consistently.
No. That's when you got to get out in front of fast.
Well, anytime you change your story, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
A coworker of Bill's testified that Bill had talked about wanting to buy a gun a short time before his disappearance, though, so that kind of helped the defense. Also, a computer expert testified that there was just as much evidence that Bill could have made those suspicious online searches as there was that Melanie did it. For example, a search for undetectable poisons was made almost immediately after a search for information on gambling. And gambling was Bill's thing, not Melanie's. Although I could say that Melanie could be looking up gambling as well.
Yeah.
To use in her whole plot.
She sure could have been.
And the defense also called a plastics expert in to testify because he believed that the testimony on the trash bags was not based in real science.
That's certainly possible.
Yeah.
And then Melanie chose not to testify in her own defense. So in closing arguments, the defense focused on the idea that Melanie didn't have a motive to kill Bill, and there is reasonable doubt in this case. The prosecutor described Melanie as a manipulative, cold-blooded killer and revisited all of the circumstantial evidence against her. So the jury took 4 days. They came back with guilty verdicts on first-degree murder, desecration of human remains, perjury, and the unlawful possession of a firearm.
Yeah, she was acquitted of the 2 counts of hindering apprehension as well as tampering with evidence and possession of Xanax without a prescription, but those are all minor. Wouldn't have made much difference at this point. The prosecution firmly believes that Melanie had to have an accomplice, though, but they've never been able to bring anyone else to trial. To me, the strongest possibility seems to be her stepfather, Michael Caporero, because he just seemed kind of involved in this.
Yeah, although I could also make a case for her doing it on her own.
I guess, but how the hell would she get him in the shower?
Well, you can do that.
He was like 200 pounds. She was like 110 pounds.
All she's got to do is dip him over the edge.
Edge of what?
The shower, the stall.
Dip him over the edge?
Or roll him over. I think it's possible that she killed him, and then once he's dead and she's trying to move him around, she says, "Holy cow, I can't do this." And then she gets the idea, well, if I cut him up, then I can handle things from there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's probably possible. But I think she'd have a hell of a time. Even a third of his body's going to weigh 70 pounds or so.
Yeah.
Well, maybe less once the blood's all drained out. Not to get too graphic, but it's a lot of weight for her to carry around. Although there are ways to do it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think she could have done it by herself.
Yeah.
It's certainly easier if she had someone to help.
I know, I just feel like if someone had helped her, they probably would have gotten caught somehow.
I think so.
Yeah. So while the jury was deliberating at her trial, Melanie recorded an interview with ABC's Primetime for a special titled Sex, Lies, and Secret Lives. She's looking for a lot of sympathy for herself. It was kind of gross. I couldn't watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it was almost like a puff piece.
Yeah. And there was also a rumor at the time that ABC got the exclusive interview because her defense attorney had connections with the ABC network. And of course she's tried to appeal, but her conviction has been affirmed, and they decided she has to serve more than 63 years before she's eligible for parole. So she's basically never getting out of prison. In 2014, Melanie went to court with a new attorney, a public defender, to try and get a hearing that could overturn the 2007 murder conviction. And that was on the grounds that her previous legal representation was inadequate or ineffective. And that was denied. And it seems like that's always the last-ditch effort.
And it's always inadequate counsel.
Yeah. So no accomplice has ever been charged. 2020 did an episode titled The Suitcase Murder. 48 Hours did a special called The McGuire Diaries. And there's a book by John Glatt, To Have and to Kill, Nurse Melanie McGuire, An Illicit Affair, and the gruesome murder of her husband. So this is the time in the podcast when I have to be a salesperson. I hate it, and I'm clearly not good at it, but it's necessary to keep everyone up to date on what's happening here at the Quiet End. First of all of our loyal early Tie Grabber members who joined at the $2 and $3 level way back have been sent an email with a special link to resubscribe and get your original lower subscription price. So if you haven't received that email, it's probably in your junk folder. I know a lot of people have. We've had probably close to half of the people have gone in and rejoined, and I really appreciate that. That's just wonderful. And if you can't find that email and you're one of the $2 or $3 people, just send me an email and I will get that link to you. Next, we recently released the September TCB Premium episode, which is about Pastor A.B. Shermer. And this guy was charged with killing 2 wives. It's called A Wolf in Shepherd's Clothing, and Dick came up with that title. It's a good one. And it was definitely an eye-opening case to research, and we really enjoyed our discussion on it. So if you want to join and have access, just visit tiegrabber.com and click on the gold subscribe button. As soon as you subscribe, you get access to all 30-something premium episodes. And we have options to pay monthly, quarterly, or annually. Plus, you get to choose your own welcome gift that I'll send you as a personal thank you. Another thing, if you visit our new website, I'd like to suggest that you check out our shop. We have just about everything you could want to put our logos on available there with our collaboration with TeePublic. Plus, TeePublic has sales all the time, so you can get some good deals.
Absolutely.
As soon as you go on there, they're asking you if you want to use a certain code, and some of it's like 35% off. It's pretty good stuff. All right, Dick, that's it for my plug. Let's go ahead and do some feedback.
Okay, I stuck with one voicemail and a couple emails.
Yeah, I think that's a good amount. That's a nice short feedback segment.
I don't want people getting bored.
I know, right? That's no fun.
And the discussions on these case suggestions are not going to be very lengthy. Because
No.
I don't want to go through the whole case.
Well, no, because we want to do an episode on it.
A little bit.
Right.
So we got the voicemails from Haley, and she's commenting on our Nebraska Joyride episode.
Hi, Jill and Dick. My name's Haley, and first I just want to say how much I love your podcast and the empathy that you show victims. I think that makes your podcast really unique, and there's some purpose in doing that. It makes the story about the victim more than about one horrible day in their lives. One thing I just wanted to say, I listened to the episode today on the joyride and the confessions that were pulled out of innocent people, and how the police officers searched the car once and then came back later and found one drop of blood. And it reminded me of when I served on a jury a couple of years ago, and it wasn't a murder trial, it was a drug trial. But basically the whole case was based on some drugs found at a car. But what happened was that someone was in a suspicious area, got pulled over, volunteered to let the police officer search their car with his drug dog that he had with him, and they didn't find anything. Then they left. He ended up collecting a few people in the area and arresting them just on some suspicions and some warrants and things. And when they went back by the car again, he decided to search the car again. And it had been an hour since he'd been there. And he found a small baggie of drugs under the car. So then he charged this man with intent to sell. It was methamphetamine. It was just enough that it was intent to sell, and they were trying to get him 5 years tacked onto a sentence he already had. And it bothered me so much. And when I was in the jury room, I said, I would hate to think that, me not being at my car, anything that gets placed under my car or is found under my car an hour after I've been there could be enough to send me to jail. And one of the other jurors said, well, but they would know that you weren't doing anything wrong. You're not suspicious. And I said, yeah, but isn't justice supposed to be blind? We can't convict someone on that. So we ended up acquitting him of that charge. And the more I found out later, the judge even said he thought we'd done the right thing. But I just thought that was interesting. And it makes me wonder how often people go to jail over things that aren't really fair. But anyway, I thought I'd share. Thanks again. Bye.
Well, thanks, Haley. That is interesting, and I'm totally with you on that. How scary to think that they could find something under your car, and you might spend years in prison for it. And I'm sure it does happen all the time. I hate to say it.
Just an hour after they had searched the car with the drug-sniffing dog and found nothing.
Yep.
Lo and behold.
You think there'd be some kind of rule, like you can't just go back, Yeah,
well, there's getting to be more and more videotapes of searches and stuff, so you can look at it that way.
I guess, but still.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
I'm glad that that person didn't get convicted for that. Plus, we're talking about a drug charge here, not a violent crime. So that's even a little bit scarier to me.
Well, yeah, look who's in prison these days.
Yeah, that's a big issue nowadays anyway. Yeah.
Yep.
But thanks a lot for sharing that, Haley. That's fascinating.
Yes, thank you.
So then we have an email from Glenn. I'm going to let you read that, Dick.
He says, being on the road all day I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, but must say I enjoy yours the most.
Cool.
Your attention to detail and relaxed presentation style makes you easy to listen to. Now, he has a case suggestion from his hometown of Melbourne. It's the 2010 murder of a 52-year-old multimillionaire named Herman Rockefeller. He led a double life as a swinger, which proved fatal to him, and is found dead, burnt, and dismembered after disappearing from the Melbourne airport. His wife knew nothing of his other life, of his mystery girlfriend, or his 5 secret mobile phones.
5? Wow.
Yeah. 57-year-old Mario Schembri was amazingly only sentenced to 9 years and then served only 4 years plus before being deported. His partner, Bernadette Denny, was sentenced to 7 years. So this is interesting by itself. It's a pretty light sentence.
Yeah, it's been a little while. We were doing a lot of Australian cases for a while, so.
Now, he's got a couple of Melbourne beer suggestions.
Perfect.
Either Little Creature's Pale Ale or Carlton Draft. So
I think we've had that, Carlton Draft.
We've had some Carlton. I don't know which one exactly.
Okay.
Can't remember. So yeah, this guy, and I just read a little bit, but this guy is a piece of work, this Herman Rockefeller. And I don't know how he was able to juggle things so well or so effectively that his wife had no clue what was going on, but he was able to do that. So I thought that'd be an interesting one. We haven't done an Australian case for a while.
Sure. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Glenn. Thank you for the recommendations.
Okay, and then the last case suggestion is from Megan.
So Megan writes, I'm not sure if you guys did it already or not, but you should do an episode on Anthony Garcia. He was a doctor that killed 4 people for revenge after losing his job. Reminds me of the Amy Bishop case. So what do we know about this?
Well, he was employed at, I think it was Creighton Medical Center in Nebraska, and he was fired for job performance issues. And he didn't take kindly to that. So he returned with a gun, and he killed the son of one of the doctors who had fired him, not the doctor himself. He killed another doctor couple, Mr. and Mrs. Doctor.
Okay.
And one other person who was not directly involved in his situation. And then he stood trial, and I guess he's been portrayed as mentally not all there. Maybe insanity is a defense, I don't know. But he was convicted of 4 homicides. So I thought that was an interesting case. We love doing doctor stuff.
I know, because they can be so twisted.
Yeah. What is it with that?
I don't know. Yeah, I think I remember this case being on 48 Hours or one of those shows, because he was kind of just a weird guy, and that's why he was losing his jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he'd had a history of losing jobs.
Yeah, we have seen something about it.
Yeah.
Okay,
so we'll think about doing that too. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks to everyone for listening and for sharing your feedback with us. And we'll talk to you next week at The Quiet End.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.